Hi and welcome to Yarmouth Frame and Gallery. We're here today with Bruce Habowski. We're going to talk about his art career and this certain body of work here that's in the gallery right now. And so let's get started. Hi Bruce, thanks
Hi.
for being here.
How you doing?
Good, yeah, this is fun.
Yes, I'm glad you agreed to do it. I think it's a great idea to talk with artists about how they go about doing artwork and how they got inspired.
Yeah, I'm totally into all of that, and there's such an interesting history for everyone as to how they got from point A to point B. So I don't know a whole lot about you, so this is going to be fun for me.
Thank you.
Bruce has been pretty new to the gallery. It's been, I think, maybe 3
Two
years.
seasons,
Two
yeah.
seasons.
Yeah.
And so it's been a joy. It's Maine, as you can see, and we'll talk about these and what inspires Bruce. So I think that would probably be my first question. Where do you get your inspiration?
Well, my inspiration is mostly based on Maine, the urban environment in Maine, structural items like architecture. I like that patina of time on objects. I find that to be a main focus. I have in the past, and still do, work in a variety of subjects. But I tend to always favor something with an angular sort of part to the image. And like in some of these paintings with the houses down here that are a little cut off, but that's the urban fabric of Maine. It could be any city, but because I live in Maine, I focus on that. So that's really kind of my inspiration. I do like to do landscapes and interiors at times also, but the landscapes always for me have to have that element of the man-made in them. It's very hard for me to do just a straight landscape.
Yeah, the style is interesting too, because you can paint big, you can do like a big close-up, but you also have these little tiny pieces that are just so distance is what, perspective is what I'm trying to say.
These are oil paintings. I have in the past, I actually started in oil painting back in '93. I started and like a lot of artists, you try different media, and I went through in the early days of color pencil, acrylic, which I am not a fan of acrylic, I never will be, but to each their own. I admire people that can especially work outdoors with acrylic.
What did you find that you didn't like about it?
The dry times, the little bit of change in color. Then I spent quite a bit of time with watercolor. At the time, of course, is when I was getting into finding out about other artists like Andrew Wyeth and Edward Hopper, which I know if a lot of people know, his watercolors are amazing. There's a lot of nice urban watercolors. But I spent, I want to say, probably 8 to 10 years in watercolor. And just in '93, took a workshop, just a small little local, where I lived in Maine, because I moved here in '91, and that kind of switched me over from watercolor. What I like of the watercolor was you trying to get that sense, the wash of a tone in the correct saturation, and especially if you're working larger, can be frustrating. So I tended to be more of a layering type artist, just trying to do the more wet and wet
it's
traditional that you see in watercolor.
Working backwards with the watercolor, because you got to think of the white and bring the color forward.
Yes, it was. I just like oil painting because you can, in a way, create all those effects with oil paint, depending on how you use it. It's very forgiving. A lot of people kind of don't think that sometimes, but if they had someone show them just how easy it is to use, and the misconception that, well, it takes so long to dry. It all depends on what you add to the paint. Most paint that you're using in general dries pretty quick, unless you're adding additives, commercial additives to it. But I find it very, very forgiving, and a lot more options available for technique and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm an artist as well and find that exactly the same thing. I love oil painting because you've got time to go back in it if you want to. Yeah, the watercolors, it's got a lot to do with the quality of the paint and the paper.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, paper especially is a big thing, I think, and of course, some of the techniques you see in watercolor with the more wet and wet, how they kind of drop the color in and it spreads nicely.
Yeah.
Like your traditional way
It
you might
always
see
looks
watercolors.
good, doesn't it?
Yes, and so you can see that having the right brush and correct amount of pigment, and you know, back in the day, it's like you can't see the pigment, how much you have on there, so you don't know if you have enough to create. It was just more trial and error, but yes, I'm pretty happy with oil painting right now.
You mentioned coming to Maine. What drew you?
Well, at the time, my ex-wife and her parents were up here, and they had a place in, well, they had a camp up here. They were living in Connecticut, so they would come up here in the summers to Moosehead Lake, northern Maine.
Yeah.
And so we were living in Florida at the time, so I was ready for a little adventure. She found a job up here, and we transitioned in '91 in January, driving a U-Haul with
Oh, you were brave.
another, like a 26-foot U-Haul with another small trailer behind it. Yes, it was. Who knew? Yeah.
Oh man.
And then we had like we were going to unpack the truck the next day, and the wife at the time said, no, we need to unpack it now because there's a storm coming. Sure enough, the next day it was like 18 inches of snow. I had seen snow before when I was a little kid, but it had been a long time, so that was something.
So funny.
That was something. Yeah.
That's great. I'm 4th generation Maine, so.
Yeah, it was a big transition.
Yeah, that's funny to me.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you stayed.
A lot of inspiration up here for sure. For sure.
So how did you, I'm assuming that you are into art full time. Is this a full-time thing for you, or do you split your time?
I work full time and fit into painting as best I can for supplying a couple galleries that I have. Do that for a couple reasons. I think the main reason is some artists can get caught up, if you're not careful, into, for lack of a better description, painting for the market, what you think might sell, or if you sold one particular type of subject, oh, that must be painting those because those are what's selling. It's really hard to know the consumer so in such a personal way, because honestly, some people collect different types of subject matter.
Yeah.
So it's very important to just focus on what your subject matter is that you love to paint, because that passion, that love will come through.
That's what I say.
I
Every
believe.
time a piece comes in, I just say to myself, that one's not going to last. That's got the heart and soul of the artist.
I find that the quiet beauty and sort of the events of the everyday, the real kind of way people live in an area, if you take the time, you can find beauty in that. And it gives you that freedom to paint whatever you want and to take chances on some paintings that you may not, because maybe you have to supply a gallery, you got a show coming up, whatever it may be. So everyone has their own choices to make, but that was mine.
Yeah, I find that with selling in a gallery, it's the right person at the right time with the right art. I have not once really found a pattern as to how a gallery delivers their work. There's so many different ways to do it, and you end up needing to know who your clientele are, what the lay of the land is and why they're buying the work that they're buying. Like our gallery, they want just exactly what you're saying, a little piece of heaven that they've moved to Maine to have. And I don't know, your work just really has that. For me, when I look at it, it feels like the old time Maine. You know, like, I don't know, when I was a kid, and you could go for miles on a road and not see another house or a telephone pole, and it was just this magnificent beauty of Maine. And there's that real quietness with it.
That's why.
A peace about it. And is that intentional with your work? And where did you begin and how did you end with this look and feel?
Well, it kind of goes back to when I was a young little guy. And like everyone says, you know, I always drew, and I would draw. I'm still big into military type things, military history, and that sort of drawing the tanks, the airplanes, and all that. I think really taught me early on, you know, bits of perspective, detail.
Precision, yeah.
I know it seems to be a big trend now. A lot of painterly paintings are very common, but I like to get in. I like to find the uniqueness of the subject, and so painting realistically in that sort of 50-50 detailed sort of finish brings out the uniqueness of that particular subject at that time in space. And I think that's important. It doesn't make it generic. It's a very particular moment, an item. And so it's, again, coming back to the patina of history. It's almost like I'm painting my self-portrait all the time. You know, we all get a few battle scars, and putting those on objects and seeing that history use is really important.
Yeah, that really makes sense. So it sounds like you were supported in your art choices. I like to ask that question because not everyone is. How much of a battle you had to put up to keep at it, whether that was within self or with outward forces. How was that for you?
No, I've never had any, I've never actually entertained the idea of pursuing a career in art. No reason, just I didn't have that kind of parental support background. My parents divorced when I was 8, so I was living with my mother. And she was crafty, you know, mom's crochet or do crafty projects. So, and she saw I had some talent because in high school I had some, you know, at the time, I don't know if they still have it, the National Scholastic Art thing. And so I participated in a couple of those from my school in the district, and that was a big deal, kind of, it was nice. But I never thought of going to art school. It was just kind of, you go out in the world, you get a job, and I always pursued it though. And, you know, I always pursued it in the sense, like, never that I thought, you know, I'm going to make money doing this. It was more about my identity. So I kind of had to do
like
it.
a meditation.
Yeah, I wouldn't even call it a hobby because I was trying to sell them and stuff from day one. Doing art shows, and which was nice because when you're in outdoor fairs, you get to meet the buyers. You have to learn how to talk about your work, how to verbalize what you're doing, which is always hard. And I think that can help you crystallize more of the path you want to take by talking about it. So it's good we're kind of doing this right now. Every little bit helps, so to speak. But so my mom, you know, she tried when I was younger, like high school, wanting to do life drawing. Of course, life drawing, you have to work with nudes and stuff.
Yeah.
And so my mom, when she found out, I was like, no, you're not going to do that at the time. But, and I've always been intrigued by doing the figure. Part of me is mostly, I'm very much a loner a bit. I'm just in my own head all the time with my art and stuff. So I always felt to really get into that identity of a sitter or feel that the lines and, you know, drawing, that you would really need to be more of a people person. So never say never, but at the moment, I paint the things that people build. So
Yeah, no, it's good. I really like well, we should talk about some of this and location and how much traveling do you find yourself doing for work and to paint? Do you paint from photographs or?
I do both. The majority of my work is created from photographs I've taken, mainly for like little details, and I never really take a photograph and transcribe it super exact. I mean, it's like how you drive down the road and you see a spot of light on something and it just captures your mind for painting. So I'll pull over and take a photograph, and I try to, when I paint the painting, keep that moment as the main actor of the painting.
Put it away and bring
Not
it
like,
out.
oh, well, there's a tree in the painting next to the barn, but you as an artist, you have to edit, and the tree plays no part in your message, so you need to edit out certain elements. To be careful of that when you're working realistically like I do, you got to be careful to pay attention to your lighting angles if you're working with changing those, having awareness of how light falls on objects. But, and I do outdoor painting in the summer mostly. Those are just maybe 1.5 hour sketches, usually no bigger than 11x14. And some paintings come out well enough, I frame them. Others, it's mostly about being out in that, capturing the color notes that cameras can kind of distort, or I'm usually using my Android phone for photography out while I'm driving down the road. So those can be notoriously not accurate, but when you're observing nature and seeing colors,
you're living in it.
Yeah, you can figure out how to correct it.
Yeah.
And it's not about copying the photograph. It's about that moment in time that you saw it in your mind, that instant story it told. So how can I use that as the framework to build the image?
Yeah, that's one of the things I found difficult about painting plein air, because you're there for however long and the sun moves, and now your shadow's somewhere else, and it's almost better to, what I found for myself was to paint small and quick and just give the essence of something and then take it back and recreate it with a photograph.
Right.
And do it that way.
You may take a photo of the same scene, but of the painting you're doing plein air.
Yeah.
To maybe, because plein air painting for me is you're practicing your efficiency of paint stroke. You're practicing, like a lot of times I'll use different palettes I don't normally use in the studio.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And I use limited palettes. A lot of times I'm only using 3 colors in white.
Yeah.
So trying to learn over time, okay, here's the subject I'm painting, and I know it has brighter colors, so I think these 3 colors will facilitate achieving a close likeness to them. I'm more of a value painter, not a specific color painter. And, working realistically, you want the form to exist in space as much as possible. And that's kind of what I focus on. Occasionally, though, I'll mix that realism with the flatness of the picture plane. Like this painting here is very flat and in your face. And what I love to do is bring that subject up close, and then you have objects in front of that are casting shadows and creating that 3-dimensional look to the painting. And then, of course, certain elements like here, with a little bit of cast shadow because the window framework protrudes a bit, is always a lot of fun to see how far I can push that. Because I am a fan of kind of flat, plain, sort of abstract work. Certain painters, Richard Diebenkorn's a big one that I love his work quite a bit, and seeing how they apply techniques to their paintings. How can I apply that to my realism painting?
Yeah, I think for myself, George Bellows. He was a big influencer. Do you teach?
I have taught some workshops, different local things. I would like to do more of that. I think I'm good at it, and I've discovered. And doing my YouTube channel, I have a lot of painting tutorials there. So that was interesting when I started that. I started it because I was having trouble finding deeper videos I wanted on art on YouTube. So I thought I'll just create some videos that the content I would like to see if I was looking for something. So I've gotten good feedback on those, and of course working full time now, it's a little harder to get a regular schedule with that. But I do plan on continuing with that in the future.
Yeah. When did you sell your first work of art, and how was that for you?
Actually, in high school, for a little lunch money, I used to, coming from Florida, you had a lot of surf culture.
Oh.
And one of the surf companies down there was Sun Deck, you had Ocean Pacific. So Sun Deck had a certain logo with a sun, and you can look it up on Google or
I'll
something.
see if I can find one
Yeah,
for us.
but so I would draw like, Billy and Jan, Billy plus Jan. I would do that in bamboo lettering with the Sun Deck sun on the horizon and like hibiscus surrounding, like a little $5, $10 little thing that I would sell for lunch money. So that was kind
That's
of
awesome.
fun.
So that was encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course I did art in high school, and it was hard in 10th grade. The teachers actually wanted to put me right, up to, because you could take art every year, then by the time you're a senior, it's art 3 or whatever it's called. And they wanted to do that right off the bat because I already knew all the basics.
Yeah.
But you had to go through the hoops, so that was a little dull in the beginning with art classes, but still learning a thing or two. But my high school art teacher was very, when I was a senior, was very good.
Oh, that's
And,
so helpful, isn't it? To
yeah.
have that encouraging
Yeah.
support, really, for that. That's wonderful. So, what would you say is your biggest success with art?
That's, I think, always being curious. I think the money you would think, oh, I sold a big painting at whatever. Maybe
That is nice.
that's
Don't
nice.
Get us wrong.
Always making sales nice, but if you don't stay curious, I think you stagnate. So my biggest success to me is developing that trait to always be curious and try new things, which leads back to me deciding to stay working so I have consistent income to pursue whatever artistic angle that I wanted. And everything comes with a price. It could take you longer to be found or discovered
Yeah.
or to be names in newspapers, magazines and such. But you got to pick your choices. What do you want to be? I just saw too many artists. So when I first moved to Maine, I'd go to galleries and you would see certain work that, wow, really knocked you off your socks. But then you've been painting 15 years, you see that person again, and it's not as inspiring anymore, and seems to be exactly like you're moving forward.
Yeah.
So I was kind of happy to see. I didn't really think about that. I just, because I was curious, it just happened naturally.
Right.
That you're gonna grow and make leaps and bounds.
Always questioning.
Always questioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the good.
That is good. So what led you to choose being in a gallery?
I think galleries can offer you a lot of connections, but mostly when you're home or you're, like when I did the art shows and sidewalk art shows, a lot of artists do outdoor events. It's not a natural environment to show paintings. It's very hard to see them in their best light. Galleries offer that very contained space, controlled space, to see the work as it should be seen and to have some potentially quiet space around it so people can observe and appreciate it and look at it a little deeper,
Yeah.
I have sold stuff like out of my studio, but that tends to be a little more organized than your normal, say, outdoor show,
Yeah.
which I don't do anymore. I quit those years ago because I didn't find mostly that the marketplace, I don't do prints and stuff, and it seemed like that environment was big on.
It's good for
Making
learning
money.
people.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot
You
talking
learn
to
a
people.
lot about people.
You learn a lot about people, and you learn that engage with them.
Yeah.
Learn to engage
I've
with
been there,
people.
done that too.
Don't be scared. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll learn.
And I find that in the gallery, it's more about a connection with the visitor. Sometimes people will come back 3 or 4 times before they're ready to purchase something. They just want to spend time with it without intrusion. And I think that's hard to do at a fair.
Right.
Where you're engaging, the artist wants to engage, and it's difficult to slip in and slip out, which we do have quite a bit. They just kind of get in the door and go around the corner.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You just allow them to feel comfortable and do what they want to do. But yeah, it is interesting with people and buying and how they land upon something that speaks to them, really.
Right. That's the hardest part, I think, is finding, the holy grail that some artists try to chase is, what are people into? Or some might even go as much as look up trends for 2025, color, and I just do my thing and work on finding the venues to try to sell them, and realizing that certain paintings that you might do are a longer sell, and some parts are a marathon. If you're trying to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, I think it comes across in the art for sure. Like I said earlier, they come in and there's just something magnetic about a work of art. There's one in every show, and I've gotten to recognize it. It's just like it's got everything. It's got the heart, it's got the soul, it's going to be perfect.
And it's hard to know what that is sometimes. I mean, I know what you're talking about.
But I think it's those moments when you're in the gallery, and I'm sure you lose track of time, and something takes over, and you just wake up somewhere at the end of it and go, oh, okay, I like that. Yeah. That one works.
Yeah, it's hard, the editing of what, I could take lots of pictures, or because my time's limited, so I have, say if I'm on vacation or something, I have sketched, and of course I do the plein air painting in the summer, but trying to, the editing of what you're going to paint. Now I'm experimenting with combining reference photos, parts of reference photos, to build my own new,
That's great.
new image. Like I've done some recent trains where the train didn't have any graffiti on it.
Oh, yeah.
But graffiti tells a story, and it's a nice technical feature to have for showing texture. So now I've started just collecting. Sometimes they'll see a train that's not interesting, but the graffiti is. So I'll take a picture of the graffiti, and I keep very meticulous folders on my computer with urban reference, landscape, and so on.
Yeah,
and I have a folder for graffiti. Then I'll take a piece of graffiti and draw it onto another reference.
Oh,
folder.
sure.
So that's where you got to be, depending on what you're combining, which you have to be careful about making it fit in space and that kind of.
It really is an individual
challenge.
Journey, isn't it, as to when you get comfortable with experimenting. And I think there's a certain level of comfortability where you trust that you've got the skills, you know what you're doing, you feel good about it, and you can let all that anxiety or worry go.
Right.
And it does take time. I don't think you're necessarily, not all of us anyway, born with that. So you have to practice. It is like a meditative practice to move.
I never, when I paint something, and I feel it should always be like this, because that's what pushes you forward, is I only know 80% of the painting when I'm working on a painting. I know, what's going to happen. My, kind of nutshell of an idea, I know 80%. I always want to leave that 20% open for, what if I'm making a stroke or washing paint in to plan on coming in later for extra layers. But then, because I'm paying attention when I'm doing that, I'm like, oh, that kind of lends, like you're maybe making some techniques that you know are going to play into the next layers, and you're going to leave some of that.
Very nice.
So you don't really know. You're taking educated guessing based on your experience you have at that time. But that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Like here, trying to, how I was going to do the shingles and not make them look all dull, one flat color. So I played around. I mean, if you get up here close, there's some tealy greens, some pinks, nice oranges, but all together, because of the values are very similar, nothing really, one color stands out. So experimenting with that was fun in this particular piece.
I'd like to ask you, what would be your advice to beginning artists?
I would say consistency and commitment
So
would
great.
be.
It's perfect.
I've seen it too often, and I've taken that one workshop in '93, and there have been times I've wanted to take workshops with a particular artist over the years, but money was, they tend to kind of be a little pricey, and it just never worked out. So my teachers have been a whole huge collection of art books of artists that inspire me, especially Edward Hopper. He's like my biggest influence. All the years I've been painting. To be fair, I mean, hopefully you won't get any rude comments or anything, but I look now, I don't think he was an excellent technician in painting, but his narrative.
Yes, it's so important.
His narrative is, so it doesn't matter, some artists, especially, say I'm working realistically as an example, that I have to get photorealistic. I know I admire that type of work. I have books on it in my library, and I'm aware of it. But all these things that you expose yourself to, you're extracting elements that you see yourself in and are pulling out for your own work. Right. So you're kind of using those for little Lego building blocks for your own way of working, is how, for me, I do it. That's my school.
I think that's how you can get away with using something that speaks to you rather than copying something that you want to say to someone else. It's a fine line, but
I've heard of that a lot, where the students will emulate their teachers, and I have never, for me personally, it would never cross my mind. I'd be like, okay, I like the way he puts paint. I like how he holds his brush when he's applying that paint technique. I can see how I can use that stroke of paint to create this problem area and have on paint. For me. I never understood why. I get the concept why you might want to copy somebody in the beginning to really practice how they're rendering something, if that's your goal. But you want to be careful not to hold on to that too long. I guess
you don't want that to become part of your identity.
You don't want to be, he paints like. I mean, it's hard to. So many artists in the world. It's hard to. You hear that a lot, and that gets kind of. You
got to develop your own confidence.
Your own confidence. So consistency, commitment. I think commitment's the biggest one.
Yeah.
You always have energy, a level of energy.
Isn't that
towards
true?
your goal?
Oh, yeah, always.
Some days if
you're not
full-time
feeling
job,
you're not in the right direction.
But you still got 10% to go prime panels because you want to go out and paint this weekend. So you got to prime those, and that doesn't take any mental effort. So, and a lot of times when you get
still
rolling,
a commitment.
When you get rolling on that, sometimes you get inspired that, let me just work on this tree over here. Next thing you know, you're painting for an hour. And that over time builds up to 20 hours. But if you didn't do that, you would lose those 20 hours of experience. So
and spiral downward probably rather than upward.
And it's just as important to look at other art, and like to read a lot of biographies to try to get inside the head of artists and how they thought. Like a lot of times you only see in their best paintings reproduced over and over again. When you see a better version, like a writer that's really done a good job on biographies, and a more selection of the work, so you can really get a better idea of who they really were, and that can help inform you also about artists that you admire.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good stopping point to move closer so that Bruce can talk about one of the paintings here, and we're gonna make a little clip and be right back. So Bruce, let's talk about Fish Beach. That is a very popular destination for your artists.
Yes, this painting here, Fish Beach in Shadows, is of Monhegan Island. It's 10 miles off the coast of Maine. And I haven't been there in quite a few years now, but in the beginning, I had visited the island about, I'd say 4 or 5 times. And one of the locations on the island is Fish Beach, and that's where a lot of the fishermen, it's like a little cove there next to Manana where they park the boats and bring in their little skiffs here to come in and rest from the day's work. And always a collection of boats on the beach to paint. And this one really lent itself well to my love of structure, how you have the composition broken out with little pops of light, kind of in this notorious third quadrant that you hear a lot in composition, the 4 points, and so it's kind of on that 1 point, which I really liked a lot. I actually did a larger version of this painting recently. I sold it. It was a 24 by 24, very similar, kind of just enlarged this one. And because sometimes you feel you do these small ones to get an idea of your color palette that you might use in a painting. And while they're finished works in themselves, it can give you ideas, like you can practice maybe some suggestive brushwork like I did here for the shingles. That's one thing I love to experiment with when I paint realistically. You would think, okay, if you paint realistically, you have to paint every shingle and to make it work. And I don't believe that. I think there's a way you can get that combination of realism and poetic interpretation,
There's
depending on the scale of the painting.
Nice to leave something to the viewer.
Right. Yep. Finding that balance. I think there is that struggle when you're working small. 2 or 3 strokes can suggest a lot, and then when you enlarge that, those 2 or 3 strokes might need to become 20. But you still want to maintain that freshness that can always be a challenge in larger work. But
Did you work from a photograph, or did you do something plein air here, or?
Because it's a little bit to get to Monhegan, I definitely took a lot of reference material. Back then, I wasn't great. I had to use the old film cameras.
Oh, wow.
Didn't have the phones. So I wasn't a great photographer, and so a lot of the photos were not super great, but I knew enough to try to interpret them to
That
best
was
of my
probably
ability.
a good
But
thing.
yeah, no, it does come in handy for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing that's very critical in my work is how I crop, especially in these very close-up scenarios. The cropping of the image is very, very important to me. I would say that's probably the number one, because I think of like how I go into a show, and something that captures my attention is usually, for me personally, a compositional thing.
Yeah.
And then you look at different other aspects, but so that kind of just is naturally built in for me.
You do seem to paint a lot of smaller pieces. Do you like working small and painting something big later? What's that process for you?
Well, I don't specifically always use a smaller format, knowing and thinking that I might enlarge it to a larger format. They stand on their own most of the time. There have been cases when maybe in later days when I'm going through my computer images, maybe I'm doing some editing on my website, I'll see a painting that I sold. I'm like, oh, I really love it. And it sold quick. And I'm like, I wish I would have done this part different or that part. But, you know, there's a little element that you wish you had done differently.
Yeah,
so that's when I might
it.
enlarge it, make it a little different. And like with this small one. And mostly that was just wanted to see if I could pull off this idea I did with the suggestive coloration shingles onto the bigger one.
And something else that really draws my attention to that particular piece is the light hitting back here, but it's also coming across the bow.
Yes, I do like to have those little bits of, it's like picking up a little bit from this white here. You got the white door back there, and then not as brightly lit, but because most of the time it's like dirty old paint anyway. But if it was bright white in the reference photo, it would make it not as dark, not as bright, because you don't want to attract too much to an edge. Even though
it's really
this
a
is
soft
when
focus.
you compare the two, isn't it?
Yeah.
A little softer focus.
Yeah, it's
edge
lovely.
control. Yeah. Yep.
And would you talk to us about this piece as well? Because you can see how this is such a long distance, and this is so much more in the foreground. So, yeah. Where is this one?
This is in Portland, Portland, Maine, and one of my favorite things to do in Portland is go down Commercial Street and hope and pray that I find a parking spot nearby, and then go to the wharfs, the working wharfs. One thing, like I love boats, I love the sea-type subjects. My goal, if I paint them, is I want them to seem real, not glorified representation. Sometimes you might see in different kind of coastal towns and galleries, potentially. I'm a little more rough and ready type. So the old lobster boats, when you're up close to these things, I just walk around taking pictures like I own the place. No one ever, like the guys are really cool. When you ask them, say, oh, I'm an artist, you mind if I take a picture of your boat, whatever. They love it. And so if you're up close to these boats, you see where they pull the traps up and how that trap over time scuffs up the side of the boat, gets all dirty, and that's history of use. Back to my history of use, I love painting. And there's so much history. I mean, just wear and tear, and when you're enjoying your lobster in some fine restaurant, you know, this is how it happens.
Exactly.
So I admire people that do that sort of work, because you know, I don't see, I can never probably do that, you know.
I've never been out there.
Long days, hard work.
I'm not a sailor, for sure.
So it's kind of like paying tribute. And artistically, it's such a collection of little shapes. I used to, in the beginning, go there, and when I would take reference photos, I would try to find a composition and really, you know, look around. But then I realized there's compositions all over the place. So I would just take generic photos, knowing 70% of what I'm looking through the camera is I got to get something out of this, so that I can get a lot of material at one time.
Commitment these days to take a photo. It's not like you got to send it off and pay for it.
And that was awful because half of them didn't turn out. So that's why I like painting. I wish I lived closer because I would like to go down. I've tried painting at the wharfs one time, and that was an experience. That was back when I first started plein air painting outdoors, so
Did you get bothered much by people walking by, or were they pretty
people are
respectful?
intrigued, and that's something I would say if you're painting, if you're putting yourself out there in public, number one, that's your opportunity to engage with a potential customer.
True.
And potential person that would never go to look at art.
True. Very
because
true.
They're afraid they're not smart enough or whatever. Some galleries can seem very standoffish. So it's important. That's your chance to be an ambassador. I'm always talking to people when I plein air paint, especially where I live now at the head of lake, 5 miles from my home, where I paint a lot in summer. I look forward to having conversations. You kind of don't. It kind of messes up your painting rhythm a bit, but the plein air painting isn't about getting finished work. It's about getting color notes anyway. That's kind of like my advertising in a way. So it's fun.
No, that's great.
Yeah, but
All right, so I'm going to move the camera back, and we'll talk about another painting. So Bruce, let's look at this piece here and tell us what this story's about.
well, this is a location in Waterville, Maine, where I lived from 1996 to 2020, so quite a while. And Waterville's 20 miles north of Augusta, Maine, which is the capital. And I always loved walking around in Waterville because you have the residential side streets, and it's an old mill town. The mill's now closed. I believe it's called Scott Paper. But this is the backside of some downtown buildings. This was painted plein air, started plein air. And like we were talking about earlier, my plein air pieces are usually, I try to get about 80% completed on site, because the other 20%, I live with it for a while and make it a painting when I bring it back to the studio. Because in the heat of the moment, you're just trying to capture things. My biggest concern was this contraption up here was really cool. That's kind of the first reason I sort of started painting it. And this tone of color on that building. And this particular section, I think, was an old pawn shop or something. But this kind of stenciling on the wall was created. That was not there in person. I just thought it needed a little something, a little more interesting in that space. So kind of just made that up. Kind of fits in nice.
Yes, I agree. I like the metal stairs too.
Yep. Which can be hard to know, especially at this scale. What parts, what percentage of the elements do you need to really get right to let the eye fill in the rest?
Well, to
So
get
that's
that
the key.
angle, that
angle.
little bit off, and into
Yep.
space there.
Yeah, I think it adds. I've always liked those in general in an urban setting, and you got to be pretty skillful to really paint them well. But on this scale, you can suggest them pretty well. And I also liked how you have this combination of, this isn't super tight, but when you step away, it kind of pulls together.
It totally does.
And the pavement leads back to when I was talking about, depending on how you put your strokes on, when you think you're just but painting in a base tone to apply some color later, to pay attention to what you might be trying to suggest in the end. In this case, how you get some cars always driving over the dirty pavement, so maybe this little line here might suggest some car tracks, how the sand moves, and a little bit of grit on the pavement. Just adds, again, a little bit of history, and of course, those sprigs of weeds that always grow up in an urban environment, reclaiming nature. But
Do you use an underpainting or?
good question. Yes, we haven't talked about that yet. Very rarely do I paint on a white board. All these, by the way, all the smaller panels typically are on, I just said it, they're on panels. I use MDF panels. And, of course, you gesso them, sand them, and gesso them. But then I'll tone them with sometimes just a gray, like I'll mix when I'm putting gesso on, I'll mix a little bit of black paint and make like a gray, pale gray, or a burnt umber with white. Something light toned that is kind of grayed down. I never have a strong base tone of like some artists will use a bright orange or bright red. I'm not doing that.
But it does add to your quietness about a piece, almost like capturing a moment in time. Like you'd be hard put to put a year on that piece.
Yeah, I think it leads back to what you're saying. The old-fashioned thing that every artist wants to find, like, what's my style? What's my style? It just naturally emerged. Like I've tried other things, like the brighter toned panels, And, you know, I try different things because, like I mentioned before, I'm always curious. But there are commonalities that no matter what continue to happen. And one of them is working in more grayed down color.
Mm-hmm.
So when I put stronger color, it pops more for me in my mind.
That's good to know.
Well, and it gives, I wouldn't say somberness because it sounds sad, but for what I like to paint, it is a good base layer to work with.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about the hot dogs, pizza, and burgers? I love this piece. The light in it is just incredible.
Some paintings I don't do it because of, like Hopper's my favorite influence. And, you know, I'm not channeling one of his paintings when I paint stuff, but in hindsight, this painting kind of reminded me of one of my favorite paintings of his. I believe it's called Sunday Morning. It's a long one. It's like 30 by 60 inches with the front of some buildings and a barbershop pole and whatever, but it has like poles sticking up in front of the building. And I just thought of things like that after the fact. But a nice quiet like Sunday. This is Fairfield, Maine, which is next town over from Waterville. And I've always driven by these places. I've seen them 100 million times. And there's actually been quite a few times I said I wanted to paint something, and then by the time I get around to thinking of painting it, it's been torn down and the whole building's been put up. So in a way, I become a documentarian of scenes in a way.
Yeah, Maine needs
not on
that.
purpose, but by default.
Yeah, it's great. The one thing that I really love about this piece is something that I've noticed that brings just a completeness about it. They use it a lot in film as well, but when you get to the height of a scene, they will almost always use red, green, and gold. And that little bit of yellow with gold there and the light above it in the windows, you know, up in here.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, it's so just warm and friendly.
I just like the windows can be, if observed, can be very interesting to paint because you can see parts into them, and some windows are old and dirty, so they're not reflective really. They have a film of dirt, so like down here in this window has that sort of feel of you could use a good window washing. But then as the shadow, you know, this is the sunlight bouncing off that window, but then as it gets into the shadow, then it allows your eyes to see in there, and you can see parts of the interior, which is interesting.
Well, let's do like a big switch and look at this next piece, and you can talk about that one. So, Bruce, Maine farms. Here we are. It looks like you could just walk right into this one. Where is it?
This location is just a few miles from where I live currently. I live in Wilton, Maine. So it's kind of out in the country for sure. Probably about an hour from Waterville. And when I first moved there, and since that time, of course, I've been driving around looking for painting locations. And this is, like I said, nearby. It's off of Davis Road in Wilton. And what attracted me, because you see it a lot on Maine farms. Of course, they got the heavy equipment because they're always moving stuff, doing things on farms. Sometimes it's just broken down and sitting there, which I love even more because it gets all rusty.
So true.
And you get that history. But one intriguing thing that was the most fun is one, I truly dislike painting red things. Don't ask me why. I don't like the color red. And
so
I said, well, I'm going to do it because I can't be chicken of things forever. So that was the first. Sometimes when I'm plein air painting, I'll pick a challenge to work on. Okay, in this piece, I want to work on brushwork. Another piece, it might be stronger color, a little more artificial color, and different things. In this case, it was the red, like tackling a red object. And how can I make them appealing? and how reds can be different. Of course, you got this having a little more cooler reds in it, and this having in the warmer tones. Secondary interest was having where people get all excited to start a project and then they get tired really fast. So they're painting this barn, and it's like a two-tone, and eventually it might get finished.
They didn't have a long enough ladder.
Yeah. Or they just, I mean, you see that a lot. They'll do one part of the house,
You so do.
they'll reshingle one
Yeah.
side, and the rest is left a different color. But other things like the hay bales were not there. It's a farm, and they have hay bales. But this is about making a story and telling a little more and adding elements that add interest to the scene
And it looks like it's a working
and belongs.
farm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how it purposely offset the edge of the barn a little bit. Ideally, in hindsight, I probably would add a third little hay bale. Things are good in odd amounts. I like asymmetrical numbers, but I really like how this one came
Yeah,
out. Subtle,
Yeah.
integrated into the environment. Sometimes it's not about a big splash of some bright object sunlit. It's a quieter, even though, it's not a cloudy day, the sun is still not super bright and casting super strong shadows.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for pointing out everything that we have an interest in. Some people are not here to ask the question. And yeah, that was good. All right.
Thank you.
This was great.
No, I enjoyed it. I'm glad to discuss kind of what inspired me and how I go about creating my paintings. To add a little more to when someone's here looking at them, they'll have a little more understanding of how they came about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for giving that to us today.
Thanks.
And thank you all for being here to watch. And I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. Leave a comment. We'll get some images of Bruce's studio space so you can see what that looks like. It's a far cry from here. He traveled, an hour and a half to get here?
2 hours.
2 hours.
Yep.
So I probably won't be making a studio visit anytime soon, but maybe the next time I'm up that way, I will definitely do that as well. I'm sure it'll be fun and interesting as well. So yeah, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.